I feel like we have to talk about the draft and the U.S. Constitution. Get a pen, I'll get the board. I know what your Supreme Court has said, but I don't know if it's right. Is the draft constitutional? We're going to go through point by point and tell me in the comments what you think. We're going to start with congressional power. Specifically, Article 1, Section 8. Go get your Constitution. I'll wait so you can read along with me. This gives Congress the power to call forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union. Does that make sense to you? Because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so let me continue. Here's my question. It talks about calling forth the militia. In no part of the Constitution does it explicitly state that the government, the federal government, has the right to force you into the military. You think if the forefathers really wanted that, or anybody changing the Constitution, they would have written it right in, don't you? But there are clear points of what Congress does. Number one, they form the army. That's in direct contrast to the executive branch being able to form the army. Also, they have the ability to create a standing army. The Constitution decided that they needed a standing army in order to protect the Union from foreign threats, even though everybody admitted, everybody understood that the federal government having a standing army could actually impose a threat to the citizens of the United States. So you think they'd want to balance that out, right? So the counterbalance are state militias, otherwise understood as the National Guard. So if the federal government gets too big for its britches and demands too much power and wields too much authority, state militias can then stand up as the National Guard in order to counterbalance that threat and that power. All right, we got to talk about the legal precedent. Specifically, Arver versus the U.S. 1918 was the last time this was challenged at the Supreme Court level. Keep that in mind. In this case, the Supreme Court affirmed the federal government's right, the constitutional right, in order to draft U.S. citizens into war. One of the big reasons? Other nations. This rationale I understand, even though I don't think the Constitution would stipulate it, but what this is saying is if other democratic nations allow for conscription, it puts the United States in a precarious position if everybody else knows that their Constitution negates that power. Now, this case was argued under two amendments. Number one, the 13th Amendment. The Supreme Court decided under this argument that the draft did not qualify as involuntary servitude. Not only did the Supreme Court decide it wasn't involuntary servitude, they actually stipulated that it was a fundamental requirement. It was a fundamental responsibility of the citizen to step up and defend the government. You guys ever see Starship Troopers? Now's the time to go watch it and take notes. The second argument was made under the First Amendment. It was here that they were arguing for freedom of religion and conscientious objectors, but the Supreme Court negated that, stipulating that wasn't a part of your freedom of religion. Onwards and upwards. The third argument surrounds the male-only requirement. This was decided in Supreme Court case 1981 underneath Rosker versus Goldberg. Here's the issue. This case was decided in 1981, which is prior to women's ability to fully serve in the American military. Should we not go back to this argument if we're really going to argue for equality and equal rights under the law? By the way, lower courts still upheld this decision in 2020, so it hasn't got to the Supreme Court yet. If I'm a firm believer in equality and equal rights and equal levels of responsibility, should women not be included in this? And if women aren't included in this, the great question is why? Nobody's going to like the answer to that question. And number 4, the consequence for failing to register, only for males between 18 and 25, is a federal felony. So let me get this straight. And we all know how much I hate that. The only group of citizens in the United States are men from the ages of 18 to 25. Those are the only individuals that are required to give up their freedom of choice to fight for a nation overseas at their immediate behest. And have I mentioned how you get around the draft? How you skip that civic responsibility everybody's claiming is your constitutional responsibility? You could have a boatload of money. You could be in school getting further educated. Or, like some people, you could have fake bone spurs. Is this what the forefathers had in mind? Were there any single amendments focused on expanding draft control of their citizenry to force young men into service in order to fight foreign wars? Or possibly, was this idea only allowed, and the notion of conscripting or drafting, even though it never says it in the Constitution, was there to defend their land, to defend their geographical vicinity, not to step into country A, B, all the way down to Z at executive demand and then congressional will? And on a side note, why hasn't it been challenged since 1918? The most significant reason? Because U.S. politicians know that's where the U.S. power is at. And as it gets manipulated and abused left, right, and center, it weakens the United States. It makes them more of a target. It makes them less able and less malleable to actually work with other nations along the way. That's why nobody since 1973 has stepped up to use it. What you need to ask yourself right now, why is this government talking about it again?